great job on all the recruiting updates you got at TigerInsider.com.
Well, I mean, I appreciate it. Just, got some feedback from the camps, Gary. And, I will say this. A lot of people, I think a lot of Alabama fans, were a little bit nervous earlier in this recruiting process. And again, it's still early, don't get me wrong. But I think a lot of them were taking a little bit of a wait and see kind of attitude. They felt like maybe all these coaching turnover and change might impact this recruiting class. Some were nervous that it might be a little bit like a couple of years ago. But let me tell you, you can feel Alabama building a lot of momentum in this recruiting. And I also would say this, Gary, as I look at it, and I know you have some questions, but think about the defensive line class that Alabama signed last year, which I think is potentially, and again, potentially is the key word, a great, great defensive line class. And I think with the linebackers that we see Alabama landing in this class, and then the last two classes, the talent they've gotten in the secondary, man, this defensive talent in the next year or so, it's really going to start, I think, showing itself, because I think Alabama's doing a tremendous job recruiting defensive players.
Absolutely. And any Alabama fan that's worried, let me just give you two words: Sal Sinceri. Don't worry anymore. When you got Coach Sal, it's like these commercials for these lawyers. When you got Coach Sal on your side, Rodney, buddy, you're in good shape, because he can recruit them. Yeah. He can coach them up. And by gosh, it's good to have him back in Tuscaloosa. But I do have a lot of questions for you. And I want to get to Will Anderson here. I want to get to Roydell Williams, Zack Evans, some other things. But I want to start with, and Quandarius Robinson's still out there. But I'm telling you, Rodney, you know how I am about in-state guys, as long as they can play. I mean, I love when Alabama has a good year in-state, and this is a loaded year. We've been talking about it. And I love Robinson. But I'm telling you now, if Robinson is the top linebacker in the state, Demoy Kennedy, in my opinion, is 1B, because I've been saying it all morning, Rodney. Just turn on the tape. The guy can run. I mean, he can run. He's got a great frame. He's going to add some weight. But I didn't, I guess I just didn't see this one coming from the standpoint that I thought he was going to wait longer. He just put out a top 5. Then over the weekend, Demoy Kennedy commits, and I'm like, yeah, man, because Demoy Kennedy, he wears that number 32. I'm not going to say C.J. Mosley. The coaches down there say he's an even better athlete, but he makes you think of Mosley. Long and lean, incredibly athletic. I see him much like Mosley, potentially as a guy who could come in here and play right away. Tell us more about Demoy Kennedy. What do you think of him, and how big a pickup is this for Alabama, especially when you consider at one time he was an Auburn commitment?
Yeah, and was actually here of late kind of named LSU his favorite. When you look at him, when you watch his tape, and I'm with you, you encourage these people, your listeners, to view his huddle tape. They should, because his junior highlights are really impressive. Watch the burst that he has.
Amazing.
And Gary, his feet are really incredible. I mean, he can change directions very quickly. Just a tremendous athlete. Now, the one thing about him is he's 6'2", probably, maybe 205 or so. So he certainly needs to get a little bit bigger, but he has a lot of versatility. He's a guy that, the people we talked to that were observing the camp thought that here's a guy now that you could line up inside or outside, could play versatile roles, either, again, inside or outside. And let's be clear now, Alabama needs some guys that can contribute on the inside. So his versatility to be able to do that, certainly very important. I think he's a huge pickup. I think he's a tremendous player, tremendous prospect. To me, like you said, great athlete. But if you look at him, I think they have him rated. And again, these ratings don't really mean anything. But if you want to just have something to gauge it by, he's rated a 4-star. To me, this guy is a 5-star athlete. No question about it.
Yeah, and I think he'll get that 5th star. I don't see any way around it. And I'm not a recruiting analyst, Rodney, but if you watch Demoy Kennedy, and this is just me saying, in my opinion, I'm not speaking for Rodney, but if you watch Demoy Kennedy and you don't think he's a 5-star talent, then, in just my opinion, you got to question what you're doing in the recruiting business. I mean, this guy can play. All right, when you mentioned Demoy Kennedy, then I have to ask you about Quandarius Robinson. Like I said, it's a great year in state, and Alabama's making hay in state. You look at this recruiting list, there's a lot of guys from Alabama. If you got Robinson to go along with Kennedy, Rodney, let me just ask you, And this is, again, we'll get into Will Anderson here in a minute. But if you get Kennedy and you get Robinson, does that right away just give you the top linebacking class in the country?
Well, yeah. I mean, they're well on their way right now. They obviously already have 2 5-stars in Braswell, Chris Braswell out of Baltimore, and Drew Sanders out of Texas. Now, Sanders may be the number 1 player in the state of Texas overall. That would be really saying something. Great player. And again, we talked about Demoy Kennedy. I think he's a 5-star talent. Quandarius Robinson is a guy. Now, again, a little bit different. People might be saying, well, why would you get all these guys at the same position? Well, they're different kind of players, really, and they can be used in different kinds of roles. And there's not just a base defense. People have to kind of look at that and consider it that, you know, they have the nickel, dime, all these different ways where some of these guys would actually line up, some maybe inside linebacker, maybe outside linebacker, maybe as defensive ends, and all of those guys would fill different kinds of roles in all these defenses. Because rarely, like you said, Gary, and you've made this clear before, they don't line up in the base anymore. The game's changed. They don't line up much in the base anymore. So different kind of roles for each one of these guys. But, yes, I think Alabama is headed for an incredible linebacker class if they can, you know, hold on to what they have. And there's a couple of more. You mentioned Quandarius Robinson, great player. He was at Kentucky, I think, this past weekend, and he's got a visit coming up to Alabama. I think it's on the 11th, and then he goes to Auburn. He'll make his decision pretty soon, so, you know, we'll see what happens with him.
Yeah, Robinson got those Kentucky people fired up. He put out a picture of him and Don't I Look Good in Blue, and it got him going, hey, I hate to break the news to you, Kentucky fans. He ain't going there, all right? I'm just going to go ahead.
I guess one of the Kentucky people that projected him to Kentucky, that would be a huge shock.
Oh, it'd be great for them. Ain't happening. You know, Stoops has done a nice job. Man, give him a lot of credit. And again, I'm not putting Alabama's basketball program down, but that would be John Calipari, you know, recruiting a top 5-10 player in the country. And I know people will say Colin Sexton and all that, but more times than not, if John Calipari wants a top player, he's not going to Alabama over Kentucky. And I think that's going to be the case.
Especially in his own state.
Yeah, with Roberts, especially in his own state. All right. Damian George committed last week, and 6'7", pushing 350, and yet there are a lot of people who are saying, well, Alabama took him to get Zack Evans. First of all, Alabama doesn't do package deals. You and I both know they've turned down great players because there was a stipulation that they had, you know, needed to take somebody else. They don't do that. Damian George, if you don't see the potential in this guy, and I'm not going to say he's polished. I'm not going to say that, you know, he's young. He's going to have to shed some weight. But if you don't see the potential for this guy down the road to have a chance to be a dominant offensive tackle, again, I'm going to question your recruiting prowess, because they took, meaning Alabama, Damian George on his own merits. I mean, this kid is a big, strong, raw-boned kid that checks off all the boxes in terms of what you're looking for in an offensive tackle. Rodney, you agree?
Yeah, I've talked to the coaches out there at North Shore a good little bit about Damian, and this is going way back. You know, listen, Alabama's been recruiting him a long time. This is not something that was recent, that they learned that to get Zack Evans, they needed to take Damian George. This is something that Alabama's been recruiting this kid for a long time. In fact, he was probably leaning to LSU. His mother's a native of New Orleans and was an LSU fan, came here on a visit about a year ago with Damian and fell in love. And really has been enamored with Alabama ever since. And I think his mom's probably a really key factor, according to the coaches there at North Shore, in his decision. He's 16 years old right now. He will enter college at Alabama as a 17-year-old kid. Think about that. He's 6'7". You mentioned near 350. He was about 350. I was talking to the offensive line coach out there. He's down to about 333. So he's losing weight. He's kind of, his body's going to really mature. Again, we're talking about a 16-year-old. He's a baby. He's a kid. And, you know, but he's 6'7", 333. And you know, I think, Gary, he has a lot of the tools. If you watch one of Zack Evans, he's got several highlight tapes, but there's one in particular you really get a good view of number 74, the right tackle, and that's Damian George. And, I mean, you can see a very the potential that he has. I think he can be a tremendous, in a couple of years, think about him in the Scott Cochran program here, and the developing him physically and his strength and all of those things. His feet will get better. I just think that he looks like he's got the potential to be a really, really road grading offensive right tackle.
Absolutely. But the fact is that his teammate is Zack Evans, rated by many as the top running back in the country. And there are a lot of reports out of Texas that Evans and George want to play together. So I know that doesn't hurt Alabama's feelings, that there's a good chance that Evans could join George as a Crimson Tide commitment. Rodney, do you have a timetable for him, and how much is how big a probability is there that Evans will wind up in this class, in your opinion?
Well, it's funny because I was talking to one of the coaches out there at North Shore. This is after Damien. Actually, we were texting. It was after Damien was committed. And I said, well, there's another one at your school that I think is coveted here. And he said, yeah, only time will tell. So there's not really a time frame that we know of on that. I do think there's a great chance that, he could end up here. Obviously, he named it, a top 5 that did not include any Texas school. That was a shock to Texas A&M and Texas, because both those schools were claiming they had him. So they're not even in the mix, which is huge. You've got Alabama, LSU, Georgia, 3 SEC schools. And you've got Ohio State. You've got Oklahoma. Well, Oklahoma's got some backs that they've got committed. Got some more coming. And then I think Ohio State's going to have its guy or two. Kendall Milton is the top back Alabama's recruiting that I think Ohio State may have the lead for. He's a 5-star player to California. So then you narrow it down to the 3 SEC schools, and maybe Georgia's trying to make the strongest push. And if you listen to them, now you have to be careful, because Georgia, they're getting everybody. If you listen to them, they're getting everybody. But they're really confident that in their position with Zack Evans. But with Damien George here, in the history of what Alabama does with running backs, and I know Georgia's had some good history too. But look, you had Josh Jacobs was the first back taken in the draft here. He's got a lot of tread left on his tires. He wasn't overused, and I just think that, when it comes down to it, I don't know that I'm not going to sit here and tell you that when you're talking about a player that was the number 1 player a week ago in the country, because you never can predict. But I do like Alabama's position.
Rodney Orr with us here on the Bud Light Hotline on the Gary Harris Show, talking recruiting, because a lot of news coming out over the weekend. And since we've talked about Zack Evans, I've been on a little bit of a soapbox this morning in regards, again, to what a great year it is in state and how Alabama's making hay. And there are a number of players in state this year that, in my opinion, are 5-star talents. One of those, even though he's not rated a 5-star, is Roydell Williams. Maybe he doesn't have the breakaway speed, quote unquote, that some backs do, but I hope Evans comes. I hope Alabama gets as many good football players as they can, but I'm not sleeping on Roydell Williams. I mean, this is a kid just up the road at Hueytown who dreamed of playing for Alabama. He is just a punishing running back. For a guy his size, Rodney, reminds me a little bit of Cadillac Williams in that he can just run over you and just vicious, just attacks people. I love Roydell Williams, and I want Zack Evans as well from an Alabama standpoint, but I don't want people to forget in their desire to see Evans commit that you, in my opinion, being Alabama fans, have one of the best committed running backs in the country in Roydell Williams. I think the guy can play, and I know you do too.
Yeah. He looks like a great player to me. Some of his video also reminds me a little bit of Josh Jacobs, to an extent, and I think he's a great player, and I think we said in one of our updates this weekend that we felt like that he was a 5-star talent, just looking at him. And I would say this, if Alabama were to get Zack Evans and Roydell Williams, which, let me tell you, there's room.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I don't think that you've got too many running backs, because these running backs, they start running thin quickly. And so there's plenty of room for both of those guys. And I think if they got both of them, it would be hard-pressed for a school to say they got a better tandem than Zack Evans and Roydell Williams, if Alabama can pull that off. But, yeah, Roydell, and Gary, watching his tape, I don't know what he's timed in the 40. I have no idea what these camps have got him, if he's even gone to any of these camps or combines or whatever. But I tell you this, on his tape, I've never seen anybody run him down. When he gets in the open field, he's got a little juice. So, to me, I think he's, like you said, I think he's one of the best backs that's come out of this state. in the last 15 or 20 years.
Yeah, Mark Ingram supposedly doesn't have breakaway speed either, and he's going into his 9th season in the National Football League after, just being an impact player as a freshman for Alabama. Listen, we're covering a lot of ground this morning because there's a lot of ground to cover, and Alabama gets a commitment from Demoy Kennedy, who is just sensational, and you've written about Will Anderson from over in Georgia, who's an outside guy, an edge guy, probably more so than an inside linebacker, but Kennedy impressed in camp, and so did Anderson. And in reading your update, you think there's a strong possibility that he will be joining this Alabama class. What's the latest on Will Anderson?
Well, that's kind of been the buzz. I've heard probably for 6 weeks, 2 months, that whatever it's worth, they call them private commitments. I don't really know what that means, but I mean, even a commitment nowadays is not really a commitment, so much less a private commitment. But the feeling has been that he may pull the trigger very soon for Alabama. Now, this is a linebacker, defensive end type from the state of Georgia, from Hampton, Georgia, Dutchtown High School. And if you watch him, even though he's bigger, he's thicker in the lower body probably than Rashawn Evans was coming out of high school. Just looking at him, his tape reminds you of what Rashawn did in high school. Just a great athlete, incredible burst, puts his hand down, can really impact the passer, the quarterback, and makes a lot of big plays, swats down passes. Just a tremendous athlete to me. Talking to some people that were observing camp the other day, they felt like he was dominant and felt like he showed all the tools. Could be an outside linebacker, could be a combination linebacker / defensive, one of those guys that puts their hands down in certain situations, or could even grow into maybe a pure defensive end. Who knows? I don't know. But he's about 6'3.5", 235, I think, is what his size is. Again, has the frame to get a lot bigger. But from the people I talked to, and one of the people in particular has a great track record of when they eyeball talent, and he said this guy has first-team All-American written all over him. I mean, he's just that kind of talent. Great work ethic. He tells me he's got a tremendous attitude, a leader type. Those are the kind, if you can find the package like that, Gary, those are hard to find nowadays, but you've got to be able to get those on your team to have the kind of success that you want to achieve.
Heavy dose of recruiting with Rodney Orr this morning here on the Gary Harris Show. Chris Braswell, the 5-star outside backer from Baltimore, who is committed to Alabama, but again, that DMV area gets a lot of attention from programs all over the country. He was in for a visit over the weekend. Everything go well with him, and is he still really secure in his commitment to Alabama?
I mean, I think he is. He's always been one of those guys that's been heavily involved in, I think, trying to promote other recruits. Promote Alabama. And so I think he is. He's pretty solid. He's from a school that Alabama's had a lot of success. They've got, 3 players here now from that school. Yavi Anoma, Shane Lee's a true freshman, as well as Darian Dalcourt, the center, that I think is going to be a great player as well. So those 3 guys are here. So I think that they're going to be very important in continuing to help recruit Braswell. And I think he is. Now, he may take a visit or two. I'm not really sure. But I feel pretty confident about him.
All right, you said there's always there's room for Zack Evans. I think there's always room for great players. I mean, that's just what Nick Saban does. He's able to manage these numbers better than any coach in the country, and that's why Alabama has the best program in the country. They get the best players, and they make room for players even when sometimes you think, how are they going to handle it? But having said that, there are 19 commitments in this class. I didn't see Demoy Kennedy coming. He pulled the trigger over the weekend. Rodney, is there anybody else out there that we haven't covered, or any of the guys that we covered? I mean, do you think there's, coming off these camps, that there's somebody that could commit this week? Anybody to be on commitment watch for?
Well, first of all, back to your 19 for a minute. Sometimes the list changes. I mean, there may be 19 on the list. There may be 3, 4, 5 guys. I'm just throwing out numbers. 3, 4, 5 guys that end up elsewhere. So really the numbers are very difficult to predict right at this early stage. But, I think Alabama's on the verge with some guys. I really do. It's just a matter of, when they decide to do it. You mentioned Zack Evans. You mentioned Will Anderson. I think those guys could be close. Now, I'll tell you, a 2021 player that we've been hearing a lot of buzz about that came to the camp that was really, really impressive, a defensive back from the state of Texas, from Austin, Texas, LBJ High School, by the name of Latrell McCutcheon. He's a 2021 kid. There's a lot of buzz that he may commit today, actually. So we'll see. Keep your ear out for that one, because he's going to be one of the top, 8, 10 DBs in the country probably next year. But that's, again, really early. But, Alabama's in on a lot of defensive linemen. I think that the LSU commit, Jacobian Gilroy, was here, a big defensive lineman. I think he's still committed to LSU anyway. He was here this weekend. He's a guy to keep an eye on as we move forward. Jock Roy was here earlier during the week. He's a big defensive lineman from Baton Rouge. I think he's a guy to keep an eye on. He was at one time committed to LSU. Really outstanding player. Timothy Smith is a defensive lineman, a massive defensive lineman from down in Sebastian River, Florida. Same high school as Jerez Parks, the current Alabama outside backer. So those are some guys that I think could solidify this class up front defensively on that defensive line. And there are others. There's a lot of other guys. But right now, I would say this, Gary. Don't count out Alabama's recruiting class like some did a little bit earlier. This thing's really starting to pick up momentum, and I think as people are starting to see some of these players, we're starting to see that Alabama got a good jump, I think, on people in terms of evaluating the guys properly.
Absolutely. I mean, listen, I don't know why there's been any angst to begin with. And they may not catch Clemson for the number 1 class. Who cares? If you're number 2, number 1, number 4, number 5, when you've recruited as well as Alabama has over the years, you're keeping pace. And nobody constructs a recruiting class better than Nick Saban. That's the thing I'm most impressed by, is his ability to construct the class, to get talent, and also meet your needs. And he's doing that again. Now, the one question that I do have before we turn you loose, and it is the big question, in my opinion, there's no doubt that Tua is going to go to the NFL draft after this season. I don't see any way that he won't. So there is the one question I have surrounding this class, Rodney, is who is going to be the quarterback in this 2020 class?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'll be real interesting, and I think Alabama may play it out a little while because they are in on a 5-star quarterback from California at Modern Day High School, which was the number 1 team in the country last year. Bryce Young, very athletic, very quick, has a strong arm, not real big, maybe 6 feet, 180 pounds, maybe 6'1", but very, very athletic, committed to USC. But, Gary, we saw this a few years ago with Les Miles when things didn't go well. He didn't even make it through the season. Isaiah Buggs, Chris Allen, Dylan Moses, those 3 guys were all ticketed for LSU. Nobody thought anyone else had a chance. And then you had a change at LSU, and all 3 of those guys ended up where? At Alabama. So I think Alabama could probably be patient a little bit and wait and see what happens with USC, because I don't think there's any doubt Clay Helton's kind of on the hot seat. If something happens there, that may open up an opportunity. I think it would open up an opportunity, definitely, for Alabama to move in on Bryce Young. Now, I have no idea if Alabama's going to recruit this other kid, but I do know I've been told by someone close to his family that Chubba Purdy, you remember the last name Purdy?
Purdy. Okay.
Brock Purdy, the
right.
quarterback from Arizona. Alabama could have probably had him a couple of years ago. Went out to Iowa State last year as a true freshman and lit it up. Well, his younger brother, Chubba Purdy, had a big year last year, threw for nearly 4,000 yards, a bunch of touchdowns, nearly 40. And he's a really good-looking prospect, and I think he has some interest in Alabama. So, I don't know what that level of interest is on Alabama's side, but I do know from hearing from someone close to them that they would be interested in him taking a look at Alabama.
All right, folks, we really just kind of skimmed the top of the iceberg here with Rodney. He has got absolutely update after update at TiderInsider.com. That's where you need to go to get the latest from Rodney. You can also catch him Tuesday nights with me on Tider Insider TV, 6:30 on WVUA 23. Of course, he's on my radio show every Monday, on other shows here on Tide 102.9 as well. You can follow him on Twitter at Tider Insider. So it's really cranking up. And Rodney, I think you made a great point. Anybody that would worry about Nick Saban in a recruiting class, they got to they've got a level of anxiety that I can't relate to. I'm just as long as this guy's pulling the strings for Alabama, Rodney, I'm not going to worry about it. This guy's the best.
No, they seem to be, Gary, hitting on all cylinders right now. I mean, they're out there pushing it, and I think that this is going to be an outstanding recruiting class.
Yeah, and like we said at the top, if you want to be impressed by an athlete, go watch Demoy Kennedy. Just watch this guy run.